Hey guys, Stockaholics, thanks for being here today. In this video today, there may be some political oriented discussions. However, I'd encourage everybody to keep an open mind. Although I will be focusing on Democrats today, that is specifically because they are likely to hold power in the United States in the coming years. Yes, they may lose the Senate, but they will likely hold the House and also likely hold the presidency, right? The stuff that I'm going to be talking about today pertains to both parties, but is probably more relevant when we're talking about the Democrats in our current context, yeah? So before you go thumbsing down my video because it has some kind of political theme and it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't ascribe to your current beliefs, please keep an open mind. All right. Okay. So let's get started. So as you all know, as Americans, we have a capitalist economy. And as you all know, this is an economic system in which the means of production of goods or services are privately owned and operated for profit. And because we are good stock market investors, we love to invest in these private companies that produce these goods and services. And we can take pride and we can take solace in knowing that the United States and the government and all of these things have our back in a capitalist economy because the USA is capitalists. And I would say no, we are not at all any of those things. And this is to kind of illustrate what we actually have. The United States is not capitalist. So this is the government spending in 2020 taken from usgovernmentspending.com. The total government spending in the United States, federal, state, and local for the fiscal year of 2020. In 2020, 7% of GDP was spent on government pensions. It was also spent on 9% was spent on government healthcare, government education, whatever that is. 6% was spent. National defense, 5%, which is actually shockingly small compared to the aforementioned categories, in my opinion. Government welfare, 5% of GDP was spent on that. And all other spending in fiscal year 2020, 13% more was spent on some other junk, which we have no idea what that was. Total government spending for the year 2020, 44% of all GDP was spent by good old Uncle Sam, the government. The federal deficit, yes, was 14%. And you might be saying, well, this is an extreme example, Stockaholics. You know, it was COVID and it was okay, sure. But it is a trend and it has been increasing over and over and over throughout any political cycle, whoever takes power. Throughout my lifetime, more and more money has been coming and being spent by the government as a percentage of GDP. So what does this tell us? No, this is not capitalism. This is central planning. This is the government telling us how our resources are going to be allocated. So, and I have this note on the bottom. Think about that for 1 second. Do you think we are capitalist if almost 50%, 50%, half of all of spending, our entire gross domestic product in 2020 was the government? And I would argue, no, this is socialism. And worse than that, I would argue that it's crony socialism. And you can see my crying doge to express my extreme discontent. And before we go deep into that, you might say, well, who cares, you know? The government's got our back, you know? Government, Uncle Sam's, he's got our best interests in mind. Government spending is totally fine, Stockaholics. I'm going to give you two stories to explain how government spending and some of the things I've personally observed. And yes, these are anecdotal stories, but they illustrate a trend in government spending. We'll call it story number one, the Army toilet paper saga. So I was in the U.S. Army Reserves for a period of time, in an infantry unit, which is irrelevant, I guess. But there was a supply section in this unit that I was in, and there was a certain person in charge of ordering the goods that we needed as to be an effective infantry unit. And there was a place where all of these goods were stored at our unit, and there was a whole block of these metal cages where things were stored. In one of those cages, actually, it was one of the one. There was an overflow. In two of those cages, they were filled to the brim with toilet paper. So during one of our training exercises, whoever was in charge of ordering some stuff for the training decided that we would need a certain amount of toilet paper to conduct that training effectively, and they ordered a ton of toilet paper. Well, as it turns out, like 80% of that toilet paper was not used in that training exercise, and as a result, it came back and it was stored in one of those cages. Well, there was a rat infestation in those cages, and apparently rats are big into toilet paper, cardboard, and whatever. So the rats, they got into the toilet paper, they ripped them up, and you know what ended up happening? None of that toilet paper ended up being usable. So we ordered a certain amount of those toilet papers, and the vast majority of it was unusable. It was wasted. I am also currently a public school teacher. I teach science, and I have another story to tell. This is kind of another government agency, so I have a lot of inside knowledge on how government spending works, I would say. At this school I'm working at, and probably most schools, teachers have desks, right? And you can store all of your stuff. You can put your papers in there. You can put whatever it is that you want on your desk. You guys know how desks work, right? So, as you might expect, teachers in my school, they've already got their desks. We've got this furniture in our classroom. And how it was utilized, whatever. For me personally, I never used the thing because a lot of the stuff that I've used as my teaching resources were digital because we live in 2020, right? So my desk hardly ever used. But the school had tons and tons of excess funding, as you might expect in a government industry. And well, they, instead of returning that money, they said, well, shoot, you know, we've got this money. Why don't we just use it? We could use some new desks, right? Well, whoever was in charge of ordering these goods, they didn't stop to ask, do teachers really need desks? Do they, should we return this taxpayer money? No. What did they do? They bought new desks. So in my classroom, I've got a brand new, and it looks just like this one in this picture, a brand new black desk, that beautiful wood covering on the top, and I don't use it. I have no need for it. I still have my old desk, and now I've got another desk in the corner, like looks just like this one, that is completely unused, and it's beautiful aesthetically. It looks very nice if you came into my classroom, but it is completely worthless. It doesn't serve a purpose, and all of those taxpayer monies that went to this desk are, in my opinion, completely wasted. So these are a couple of examples, and this is a trend that I believe anybody that works in government would be able to tell you. And what is government? It is central planning. And what does central planning do? Whoever's in charge tries to anticipate a need. It tries to use the resources that it has, and it can't efficiently do that. Okay, and you can see that in both of these examples, right? But we're investors, right? We try and think about these things in different terms, right? We try and think about it as rebel capitalists that we are. We may understand that the world around us is becoming more and more socialist, but we are open-minded and we can abuse these tendencies. So we can exploit these extreme inefficiencies in central planning. You can see here, we're kind of fish in the ocean, you know, although we might not be happy with it, although we might not like the trends that government takes. Well, we as individuals, we don't have a lot of power to change that. But as individual investors, we have the power to exploit it. And there's a surfing analogy here. You can't stop the waves, but we can learn how to surf. And how can we exploit this? Well, as you may or may not already know, this central planning that these politicians do incessantly, they tell you exactly what they want to do. Politicians tell you how they want to waste your government monies. And as investors, how can we profit on this? All we need to do is get close to that money spigot. We just need to invest in the things that they're going to waste money on. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. Don't let your personal biases get in your way. I would encourage you, go with the tide and exploit the tide if you want to be profitable. So, as I mentioned before, Democrats are likely to be in charge in the next political cycle that we see in the United States. Because we know the government likes to waste money, and because we know that the Democrats are likely to be in charge of that government, we need to anticipate how the Democrats will waste our tax-paying resources. First of all, $400, and these are, I'll explain this in a moment, these are likely to be extreme underestimates. $400 billion on a new federal program for clean energy research and innovation. $100 billion to modernize schools. Ooh, maybe they could use some new desks. $50 billion on repairing roads, bridges, and highways in his first year of office. We're talking about Joe Biden here. $20 billion on rural broadband infrastructure. Because it's the government's job to give everybody internet, right? And $10 billion for transit projects that serve high poverty areas with limited transportation options. Oh, I'm sure that's going to go well, considering I live in Hawaii and we've been spending billions and billions and billions of dollars above budget on one lousy transportation rail project that will likely need billions and billions of more dollars. And this is just one. So to think about $10 billion for any transit project is laughable. Now, what do Democrats also want to do? They want to divest from fossil fuels because, as you all know, it's the government's job to tell you how private industries should operate. And yes, all the oil industries in the United States are privately operated so far because well, you know, we have to we have to protect the planet, right? Also, there's likely to be increased inefficiencies as they increase the spending allocated to the Affordable Care Act. They have already estimated that they'd like to spend $700 billion to be spent on something called public insurance. So everybody can can foot the bill on this one, and everybody can get some healthcare insurance, right? So I'd like to end this slide with saying, remember that the government is inefficient. So all of these numbers that they're claiming, expect these dollar amounts to be magnitudes higher than what they are claiming. Expect these numbers to be trillions and trillions of dollars if they get their way, right? Some other ideas that are related to this is who else is going to benefit from some other ideas that the Democrats currently have. So they also want to plan to increase federal minimum wage. Who benefits from this the most? It's going to be your companies like Amazon, anything that has essentially a monopoly on any good or service that they already have within the United States. And this is because these companies can afford to absorb the bill as far as it goes to these wages. They can, and if these wages become too much, these companies can also afford to invest in automation technology. And you can see this in companies like Walmart, where if you go to the checkout aisles, you can see less and less employees, and over time you see more and more automated checkouts in these kinds of places, right? Same thing with Amazon. They can automate a lot of their services. They can invest in robots technology because they have a lot of capital. But what does this do? This inhibits competition. If your mom and pop wants to try and start competing with Walmart and wants to start competing with Amazon, and they want to pay this minimum wage, well, they can't afford that as effectively as large corporations, and they also can't afford to invest in technologies that can replace employees with automation. Yeah. Also, what are the likely incoming administration? Who is likely to benefit? Also China, right? They're gonna likely backtrack on a lot of the aggression, I would say, that Trump had towards, or pushing back on China and their exploitation. And who's gonna benefit from this trade? Well, they're gonna increase the trade deficits with the United States, and who's gonna benefit? Chinese companies. So, if you're interested in maintaining profitable investment decisions, these kinds of companies, both large corporations and also Chinese companies, are likely to be something you might want to look at. How I'm playing this likely political climate that will be coming. Russian oil. So I've already done this. I've shifted all of my American oil companies in my portfolio to entirely Russian oils. I think I've seen the trend progress through my lifetime. America wants to be more and more energy dependent, and they won't be energy independent. They want to invest in quote green energy, end quote, and they want to, which is kind of really funny to me if you think about it, because when I was in high school, there was a big pushback against the President George W. Bush, and there was this prevailing thought that we're invading the Middle East to get oil. And now, when we finally reached energy independence, what do? We backtrack on it, and we say we want to be energy dependent. So instead of being a net exporter in the U.S., what are we likely to see? We're going to see likely imports. And what does this do for our competition around the world? Saudi Arabia and Russia particularly, they are going to extremely benefit. I believe these nations are going to become massively wealthy in the decade if these trends continue. Also, these politicians have told us that they want to invest in green energy. They want to waste resources on green energy. What is one of the main resources we need to achieve these green energy goals that they have? It's a copper metal. And if you guys don't know, the copper mines around the world, they've consistently been degraded in the amount of copper available. There is less and less and less supply of copper being mined every year. All of the high quality, high grade, percentage yield copper mines in the world, they've been consistently declining in their yields over the years, because we've been mining the heck out of all of the good stuff. We've already found it. So at the same time, when we see a supply deficit in copper, we are going to see increased demand in governments, particularly from government spending in these kinds of metals. So, and the United States is not the only nation. If you look at Europe, they're doing the same thing. They have these green energy goals. They want to become more dependent on Russian and Saudi oil, and at the same time, they're going to push up the price of copper massively. So if you're invested in metals, you're likely to be benefiting from this. And the last one is something that I haven't particularly explored yet, but I will likely be exploring, especially as we move into the United States, into more socialized healthcare, onto how these private companies who are positioned to provide that health insurance are likely to be able to exploit that. And so I will be exploring that as they come in the coming months, and see if there is an investment opportunity. But as we know, government is likely to waste resources on these kinds of things, and I would imagine that these health insurance companies are likely to be extremely profitable as a result. But I would like to mention that this is not financial advice. This is just my personal opinion. And remember, and this is a quick reminder that I'm just some guy on the internet. Make your own decisions. We're going to close with this. And this, if you haven't seen this before, this is the United States debt clock. And I'd like to compare this to a credit card. So if you think about it, if you make a certain amount of money, and let's say you have a credit card, and you can afford to make those payments on it, right? But let's say over time that you've increased your spending on that credit card, and you've increased it, and you increase it, and you've gone to a point where the amount of debt on your credit card exceeds your annual income. Let's say you make 50 grand a year, and all of a sudden you've got $75,000 in debt. Well, the chances of you ever paying that debt back is it's unlikely. And on top of that, if you are able to do it, it's going to severely impact your standard of living, and also it'll take an extremely long period of time for you to pay it back. Well, and this is kind of sad to say, but this is where we are in the United States. We currently owe approximately 1.5 times of our current GDP as debt. And this has been an increasing trend. And you can see it from both political parties. They want to spend more and more and more and more and more money. And what are they charging it to? They're charging it to the credit card. This money, it's going to have to be paid back. And if we don't have the the economy to do it, eventually they're gonna have to find a way to do it. And what are they likely to do? Well, the Federal Reserve and Senate and Congress, they're gonna likely change the rules. And we haven't seen it yet in the United States, but we've seen it time and time again in other countries around the world. So I would like to say that yes, we can exploit this for the time being, but I would like you guys to keep in mind that this won't last forever. Eventually, your credit cards will get maxed out, and so will Uncle Sam's. Keep that in mind. Until next time.